I'm going to demonstrate how to make a box in value, and we're going to need a couple of things in addition to our sketchbook. We're going to need a number 2 pencil, an ebony pencil, a blending stump, a kneaded eraser and a vinyl eraser, a pencil sharpener, and I'm going to also use a tissue. When you create the box in value, what you're going to want to do is actually start with the parallelogram that is on the top of the box. And you can try to draw that yourself. The instructor could also be around to help you. Technically, after you have that parallelogram, you're going to draw vertical lines going down from the 3 corners that you see. And then technically, if you look, these 3 vertical lines that you just made are also parallel to each other, and the bottom of the box should be parallel to this top edge on the left hand side, and I do have to make sure that it's actually parallel. And then I'm going to take my pencil and do the same thing on the right hand side of the box. I'm actually going to draw a line for that bottom left hand edge, and if you'll notice again, the bottom left hand edge, this top line, and the back side of the box are all parallel as well. And then I'm just going to true up my box by erasing some of the overage that I have on my drawing. Once I've done that, I'm going to take a look at where the box is in space, and I can see that the table actually goes something like this. As I'm looking at this drawing, this line looks a little bit awkward, so what I'm actually going to do in order to make the drawing look nicer is I'm going to extend the table and I'm going to erase this line. Right now we're not really concerned with perspective. We're going to learn perspective in a little bit, but this line made the whole drawing look awkward because it wasn't quite in the same perspective, and so I erased that to make the drawing look stronger, and that is something you are going to want to do in your drawings. Another thing that I need to point out is that this line that I drew in the background actually doesn't match up. So if I take this line and extend it down here, the edge of this table should actually go more something like this rather than the line that I have up here. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to look and see where the folds are on that box. Technically, they can be represented in linear form as an X on that back side of the box. And then as we put value in, some of these flaps are going to look like they're going to appear like they're coming more forward and at you. The next thing that I need to do is I need to actually draw my shadow. So what I'm going to do is I can see that the shadow is extended from parts of the box because of the direction that the light was facing, and this line that I drew is a little bit off. I'm going to have to go kind of like that, and then I can actually see that it's been cut off over here on the back side, and I just have to look at the drawing a little bit more, look at the actual object on the table, and make sure that my lines are pretty correct. I know that the shadow looks a little bit strange, but what happens is I'm getting this corner over here is actually creating a shadow on this side of the box. And then I'm actually going to also create the umbra like I had talked about before. So this is the darkest part of the shadow that will be in my drawing. And as I'm looking at this, I'm just comparing the different angles, and I do actually like this line better, so I'm going to leave that as my shadow, and I'm going to just true up this edge. As you're making a shadow too, you don't want to leave it just completely a hard edge, and we will address that as we're adding the value. So now I'm going to create value on the box. I have my blocked in drawing. Again, just like we did with the cylinder, I'm going to create the darkest values first. So I'm going to go into the umbra, and it happens to be I just picked the umbra first. Sometimes I do the background first. You should be doing the darkest value first. It's a lot easier to get your contrast right away, and you can use those darker values that you created to pull onto a tissue, and then you can actually use those to create other parts of the drawing. So here I'm going to fill in that umbra with as dark a value as I can make it, And I am going different directions, and hopefully you notice I'm like touching the, oopsie, I went outside of that line a little bit, so I really should go back in here and erase, just because I want to keep that as true as possible. That's a little problem I'm going to have later. But I want to go another direction, so I'm actually going to turn my paper and I'm going to go another different direction with my pencil in order to get a really nice dark value created. It's actually starting to create a nice dark value. So then I'll take my tissue and just blend any of those white spots that are left over together. And I'm trying to stay as parallel to my initial lines as I can. I am having to turn my sketchbook a bunch of different directions. Part of the reason for that is that I want to stay with the direction that I'm going. And you can actually see I got a little bit of value into my penumbra, which is that lighter part of the shadow. That's okay because it's going to be dark there anyway. The back side of my line for the table was different than the side on the left. And so what I did is I took a piece of paper as a straight edge and I made sure that I went in there and corrected that. It's really important to do that before you put the value in, because once you get really dark, it's hard to make corrections if you make mistakes. So I'm just going to take this ebony pencil and go as quickly as I can, but notice how when I'm getting really close to the edge of my object, I kind of slow down, or I even stay slightly away from the object just so that I don't accidentally cross the lines, because I'm trying to keep a really nicely crafted drawing, and in order to do that, I have to make sure that I'm being careful and mindful of what I'm doing the whole time. Then I'm going to flip my canvas again, just so that I can get closer to the area and it's a little bit more comfortable rather than having to put my arm all the way across. Notice how I always keep it really close to my body and close to the drawing, the part that I'm trying to work on. So then as I'm doing this, I'll go another different direction, and this time I'm going to go horizontal or parallel to the table edge. Again, when I get close to my object, I'm slowing down as much as possible, but I'm going a different direction in order to unify the marks that I'm making on my drawing. So again, I'm going kind of hard here. I'm filling in the background. It's taking a little bit of time, but that's okay. We're not in a rush. We're just learning how to do value. When I feel like I've filled in enough value with the ebony pencil, then I'm going to actually switch to my tissue and I'm going to blend those different values together. There were a couple of spots too here where I actually went into my box, and so I'm going to want to go and erase those, and that might become a little bit of a problem later, but I'm going to actually go back and I'm just going to continue to try to fix any little problems that I have by using either the blending stump, or I might have to use the pencil or my number 2 pencil or a piece of tissue or sometimes an eraser. Just kind of depends. So here I'm blending in any of those little white parts that were left from the pencil not hitting the paper in the right spot. And sometimes I do need to take a minute and stop, and I'm actually going to use a blending stump this time just to get really nice and close to my edges. I am going to go back on these edges and probably erase just to make sure that I don't have any parts that are fuzzy looking. And especially in the corners, it's especially helpful to use a blending stump because it actually blends that value that you got in there nicer. So now I've got my background and the umbra done, and again, you know, this is why we don't always use ebony pencil, because you can already see it's kind of getting shiny right there. But I have my umbra and the background done, and it's pretty nice and dark. And I've got lots of value on my tissue that I can actually take and do the value on my box. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create some value in the penumbra, or that second darkest part of the shadow. And it's a really weird polygon because what's happening with the light is coming from one space, and because the light is above the cylinder, it's actually showing 3 of the top edges of the box. The 4th edge isn't shown because it's like blocked by the box itself. And so what I'm going to do in here is I'm just going to take a little bit of value from my tissue and I'm going to spread that around on the penumbra, and I am going different directions as I try to create value in the penumbra so that it's got a nice even value on that entire part of the shadow. I am going to have to take and put a little bit more value into my background because I need more value on my tissue. It's starting to run out of oomph, and so what I'm going to have to do is I need to add more value into the background, just like I did with the number 9 when we were creating that value scale. And then I can actually rub with my tissue and get a bunch more value on there that I want. And hopefully you guys can see I made a little bit of a mistake here, so I'm going to have to go back and erase just in that area. This part I am going to have to go and address later because it's actually kind of like curving, like there's something pushing onto the box, and the box doesn't look like that right now, so I want to make sure that I'm making that edge really nice later. So here I'm going to take some value and I'm actually going to apply it to this side of the box. The right side of the box is lighter than the left side of the box, and I don't know if you guys can see this too, but I actually made a little bit of an accident. Hopefully you can see that if I go just like this, there's a little line right here that was created by something. I pressed too hard on the last drawing that I made on the paper before this one, and it created a problem here. So I'm going to have to try to disguise that by using either a blending stump, or I can try to use a really sharp number 2 pencil, and I can add some value in here so that it disguises that little bit of a problem that's there. So I can take that and I can just rub into there. Another thing that I'm going to need to do is I actually have to make the shadow darker because now it's hard to see the side of the box from the penumbra. So I'm going to take another little layer of value and I'm going to put some value back down on the penumbra, and then eventually I'm going to blend that back out. So I did just use the blending stump to get a nicer edge between my box and the shadow. That did work pretty well. I am going to have to kind of hold it like this just so that you can see that, and I can see my umbra is really dark, so I'm going to have to add more value to the penumbra. But before I do that, I'm actually going to add some value to the table. So the table technically is going to be a little bit darker than this edge of the box. So this edge of the box and the top right side of the box are both going to be really, really light, and then it's going to progressively get darker as I come over here. And I want to make sure that I've got like some 0 values in here. And actually, instead of putting a 0 on the vertical part of the box, I'm going to make this a number 1, and I'm going to leave the table 0, and it's going to gradually go to a number 4 over here. So I'm actually going to start where it's darker, and then I'm going to lift the amount of pressure off of the tissue. So you can see it's darker in some areas and it gets lighter as it goes back. And I'm going to let that stay really, really light, and then I'm going to come in here and I'm going to add a little bit of value to the edge. And I am going to have to use a blending stump in order to get a really nice edge on the side of this box over here. And again, I'm going to just continue to fill this background. So if I look at this level right here, the value should be lighter here, and it's going to gradually get darker. So I'm going to start darker, and then I'm going to lift the amount of pressure off of the tissue as I blend in order to create a lighter area. And right now it's kind of deceiving because this whole part I didn't deal with yet, but part of the reason I didn't deal with that edge is because that's the folded part of the box, which is actually kind of difficult to do, and it's going to take a little bit more time. So I'm going to do the parts that are easy first, and then I'm going to go back in and add some value to those other parts. So here I'm adding some value to the top. I can see kind of an area here where it looks like that's the edge, but it's actually down about a ½ inch from there. So I'm going to have to take my blending stump and I'm going to have to go back in there and add a little bit of value. So right now I'm just going to add a little value to the back side of the box, and it kind of, this is what I'm talking about, it like all disappears if it's all the same value. So you really have to be careful so that you don't end up with something that's way too dark. Another thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to add, in order to grab some value on my tissue, I'm going to add another layer of value to my penumbra because I can tell that it's not quite dark enough anyway. So this time I'm going to go parallel to the direction of the box. The box is at that angle, so I'm going diagonally again in order to create more value. And I have to be really careful not to ruin my edges because I actually had like a corner here, and that corner is starting to disappear. So I have to be really careful not to lose that part. And now I can actually see my penumbra as separate from the table, which is really important. And then as I'm creating the blended value there, I'm also going to take my blending stump and I'm going to pick up some value from somewhere, and I'm going to try to make sure that I've got a nice crisp edge where it turns the corner there on that shadow. And it's not perfect, but you can still definitely, you can definitely tell on the video. It's a little bit harder to see actually in real life, but you can definitely tell I've got that corner that's there still. So now I'm going to go back into, I think I'm going to go back into this side and add a little bit more value here first, and then I'm going to do those folded edges of the box. So if I come in here, now I grabbed a little bit more value from the background, and I'm going to rub in a circular motion, and I'm going to add that value to the side of my box, and hopefully I'm not losing. Yeah, right here I lost a little bit, but I'm going to add more value in there later. And I do have to go back in here, and I have to be really careful where I'm adding value so that I get a really nice crisp edge between the top of the box and the side of the box. And I'm also trying to blend out the value that's in here. So I'm just going to rub in a circular pattern, and I went in different directions so that I'm getting a really nice smooth blended side, which looks like that wrapped box that you see on the table. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little bit more value. Hopefully what you guys notice about the box is that two of the folded sides are above the other ones. And on my picture, I have to actually go back and look at that table to see where the folded sides are higher, because we have to do that a little bit different. So as I looked at my folded sides, the folded sides that are from the edges, so the left and right side, are actually higher than the top and bottom. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to really lightly draw an X in here, which is kind of going to represent the folded edges that you saw in real life. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little bit more value, and I'm actually doing this with a number 2 pencil. And part of the reason I'm using a number 2 pencil right now is I don't want to accidentally put too much value on an edge here. And as I'm doing this, you can already start to see that that top and bottom part that are lower than the folded sides that are on the right and on the left, they should have a little bit more value underneath them in order to make those folded sides appear like they are in front or pop forward. And after I've done a little bit of value, I'm going to take my blending stump and just very, very lightly and gently blend that. And this time I actually have to go kind of in a circular motion, because otherwise I'm going to have that value that I put in there be all only one direction, and it's going to not make the drawing look as nice. So where I want it really, like a corner, I'm going to go exactly with the corner, but everywhere else I'm going to kind of blend in a circular pattern, and I'm going to wait down here. I'm probably going to erase a little bit so that I can see the difference between where the very bottom of my box is and where the shadow is. It's really important to have a really good edge between there. I'm going to take the sharper of my 2 pencils, and I'm going to go back in here and create a really nice edge between my umbra and the bottom of the box so that you can really see the bottom of the box from the side. So there you can actually see it's like popping forward. I do have a little bit more work I have to do. I have to go take my blending stump over here in order to make that set back a little bit farther. And then realistically, these two sides are not dark enough. They should not be that bright. So I'm going to have to go back and add some more value into that as well. But I have to actually go in here first with my blending stump. So I'm just going to go in a circular pattern in order to show where the top of the box is as opposed to the side of the box. And I want to get really specific with where the value is, and using the blending stump allows me to get into those little tiny corners that I had talked about like a lot earlier. Now what I want to do is I'm actually going to add a little bit more value onto this edge, or the right vertical side of the box. I'm adding a little more value, and then I'm going to take the blending stump and blend that in, because I could see I was sort of losing that against the side. And I'm going to do that only really up here on the top. I want to make sure that I don't lose my penumbra. And I can see I'm kind of starting to lose. It's a little bit hard to see from here to here. So I'm going to actually take my pencil and go in there and make sure that I've got a really nice edge between the box and the penumbra. And then I'm going to take the blending stump and blend that out as well. So here I'm taking the blending stump along the edge in order to make sure that my penumbra and the side of the box are really easy to see. So I can see all the different sides right now, but now I can tell that this side is a little bit too bright. And the top is also a little bit too bright. So what I'm going to do is take some value from my background, and I'm going to go in here, and I'm actually going to make these a little bit darker because it's not quite dark enough yet. And that also means that I'm going to have to true up some of the values on the other edges, because as I do this, I might lose some of the other value that I did. So it's important to go back and forth as you're adding value in order to make it look true to life. We're trying to actually represent what we're seeing. So there I've like made it darker again, but now I'm going to need to go, and I actually have to take a little bit of my ebony pencil, and I'm going to go really, really light, because again, the ebony pencil could make this too dark if I push too hard. So I'm just going to go really lightly, and I do actually have to stay parallel to the lines that I've drawn. So it's important that I also try to unify the direction of the mark making that I made. So I'm going to go both directions. I'm going both diagonals in here, and I'm going to do the same thing on the leftmost fold that's on the top of the box, or it's on the top of that leftmost side, where I'm going to add a little bit more value. And you have to have a really sharp pencil in order to get these lines, or technically it's value to the edge of the original line that you drew. You have to have a sharp pencil to get in there and actually create that value where the line originally was. So now I've got another darker area, and I'm going to have to blend that back in with my blending stump. I also want to take a number 2 pencil. I'm going to just turn this so that we can see it again. I'm going to take a number 2 pencil, and I'm going to make this part of the box a little bit darker also. And whether I take my finger or the tissue, it doesn't really matter, but I'm just going to blend that in. I can see that I made a little bit too much dark on the table, so I'm going to try to take the kneaded eraser, and I'm going to pick or lift up the value that's on that part of the table, and then I'm going to take a really clean part of the tissue and try to blend that together. Then I'm going to go back with my pencil and true up that edge so that I've got an actual edge from the background of the table to my box. And then I'm going to go back in with the blending stump and just blend that back together. I'm also going to blend together the value that I created underneath the fold. So there's kind of a little bit of a shadow that happens under where the folds are, and it's really important to take either your blending stump or a really sharp pencil in order to blend those values together. And I can actually see it's not wanting to blend. It actually looks pretty smooth on the video, but there's a couple little problem areas here in the middle of my folded side, so I'm probably going to have to take a number 2 pencil, a really sharp number 2 pencil, and go back in there. And I'm also going to take a little bit of the value from my tissue and try to make that edge a little bit nicer. So hopefully as I turn this, and I'm also going to tip it just a little bit so that you can see what the drawing really looks like. It's darker here. These two edges still need to be a little bit darker than what they are, and I also have to put a little bit more value over on this side, as well as take a ebony pencil, a really sharp ebony pencil, and I'm going to put some value from the background to the edge of my box top. I'm going to try to leave the drawing over here in order to show you guys what it really looks like as you're actually drawing, because I think the glare from the pencil is deterring what I want to show you. So I'm going to try to leave my drawing where it is, but I'm also going to use a really sharp number 2 pencil, and hopefully you can see I'm starting to get a really nice edge where it's darker on that box. So I'm adding more value on this top folded part, but the darker values are actually underneath those folds. So I'm still adding more value to the edges of those. And it's going to be hard for me to really leave that where it is, because I just naturally want to turn my paper in order for it to be easier for me to draw. Oops, and I just kind of made a little flub up there, so I'm going to have to add some value here to correct that. There, I've got the dark to light. I actually have to add a little bit more value to this side. And there I have a pretty good box. There's a little bit of a problem right in here. I'm going to add just a tiny bit more value to the edge so that you can see this left folded side of the box as being separate from the right vertical side of the box. There I added value, and I think I can see every plane. So I can see this top plane that goes this direction. I can see the vertical plane on the right side, and I can see all of the areas of the folded part of the box. I feel like I'm pretty much done. One thing that I do want to do is I feel like it's a little bit of a problem here where I had a darker value that kind of got a little messed up. So what I'm going to do is add a little bit more of this tissue value into here, and I'm going to go across the penumbra so that it really looks like it's going from dark to light on the table. Dark where the shadow is, and it's gradually going to get lighter as it comes over. And I'm even going to put a little bit more value into this edge. Partly I'm doing this also because I created a little bit of fingerprints that I want to get rid of. And I can see I've got a darker area here, so I'm going to want to go here and erase. Oh, and I have to be careful because I can see already I took a little bit too much off there. So I'm going to try to take the whitest part of the tissue that I can find, and I'm going to blend that value back in. And there I have my box.